The Vice Chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner of Virginia. Senator, thank you for being here. First off, why is Tulsi Gabbard there? What could she have to do with this case?
Okay, Katie, I want to get to Tulsi, but let me just say about the raid itself. Your previous reporter is right. You can try to get a search warrant. But there are two facts that also ought to be reported on this bizarre raid. One is that it's been reported, at least, that the FBI head of the field office in Atlanta, which includes Fulton County, has suddenly either quit or been fired. So to me, that smells like the local FBI guy didn't think this passed muster, and we need to get the answer on that. And traditionally, when you bring a search warrant like this, the person who is prosecuting the case is the local U.S. attorney. Well, the U.S. attorney that signed on this search warrant to go to the judge is the U.S. attorney from Missouri. So if you talk about something that, at least at the front end, smells really bad, and the concern from the local officials about what is going to happen to their election returns and data, this thing stinks. Then we get to Tulsi Gabbard. And again, your reporters are right. Her job is to look at foreign interference in our elections and to oversee all of the bad guy efforts in terms of spying. And the remarkable thing that needs to be reinforced to all of your listeners and viewers is that Tulsi Gabbard, over this last year, has literally taken apart what was called the Foreign Malign Influence Center, the center inside the intelligence community that was supposed to look at potential voter interference. Because again, she's still been an election denier. She is a sycophant to Donald Trump. You know, the speculation, at least up here on the Hill, is that she's done such a dreadful job that she's been excluded from most of the national security activities of the last couple of months. She's never been up here to brief, on Venezuela, Iran, or Greenland, you name it. And maybe this is some feeble attempt to get back in the good graces of her boss, Donald Trump, and to feed into his obsession about losing the 2020 election. That is at least some of the speculation up here.
That's interesting. There has been talk in, I guess, some of the more conspiratorial corners of the internet and MAGA world that the capture of the Venezuelan president would lead to him admitting or revealing evidence about how Venezuela was able to target and manipulate ballots through like Dominion, et cetera, voting booths, voting machines. Do you have any reason to believe that that wrinkle is part of why Tulsi Gabbard might be in Georgia?
I can tell you this, all of this speculation has been investigated. Is there a hypothetical case that new information can come about, or is it potentially, as your reporter said, some of the conspiracy theorists had suddenly say there was a Italian satellite that was beaming in, and the stuff that I'm not even sure Laura Loomer, the crazy right-wing troll, it's the kind of stuff she would advocate. But I've had no indication, and in a normal administration, as somebody that was very involved in election interference and frankly gave the first Trump presidency kudos for running a safe election in 2020, if there was some new information in a normal administration, they would have an obligation to report that to the Intelligence Committee, of which I'm vice chair and was formerly the chair.
Now, let me play Donald Trump in Davos talking about the 2020 election.
It was a rigged election. Everybody now knows that. They found out. People will soon be prosecuted for what they did. It's probably breaking news, but it should be. It was a rigged election. Can't have rigged elections.
Are you concerned that this raid or the search of the Fulton County Elections Office, that it's going to be used as a pretext come 26 or even 28?
Yes. The first few months of the second Trump administration, when people asked me this question, I wasn't that concerned. I am more concerned now It is absolutely critical that we protect the integrity of our elections. Make sure these are still one state and local. I'm even concerned that some of the agencies that used to help states get up to snuff, are they so politicized now that they could undermine states' efforts? There's a ton of questions that I never thought we'd have to ask in this country. And, maybe this week, as we're seeing the White House and some of the Republicans find their spine about the abuses that are taking place with ICE, maybe some folks will be willing to stand up for our democracy. But I can tell you from the Intelligence Committee standpoint, and making sure we monitor the foreign interference and then also make sure any other activity, we got to stay on it. And one of the things that I think we need to make sure that is included in any kind of ICE reform is we don't want these roving patrols of ICE agents suddenly showing up at polling stations during primaries or general elections. We may have a major vote in Virginia about redistricting. That's got to be a reform as well. The level of intimidation that the feds could bring on voters all across the country, if it doesn't worry you, it should.
So is that on the table right now as well? Let's talk about DHS funding. Is that on the table as a reform necessary for Democrats to vote for a funding bill?
I and others have added that. We've talked about roving patrols. When we're getting rid of roving patrols, saying not only knocking on people's houses without a warrant, but coming to a place like a polling station shouldn't be that far. We don't know what's going to happen. I think the ball is now in the Republican court. Matter of fact, they could only get 45 of the necessary 60 votes to move forward. So they got an issue. If we can split off the other 5 bills, which are 85-90% of the additional government spending, and then take some brief period of time to get these ICE reforms in place, I want to look at that. But that's what's being discussed. But it's we don't get to put that bill down. We don't get to put that plan down. It's up to the Senate Majority Leader and Donald Trump. There's indication that the White House is supportive, but I'm in a trust but verify mode. Until we see it, until the bill's on the floor, until I can see what the reform package is going to look like, I got to see those first.
Yeah, I've been hearing that a lot lately, trust but verify. You talked about your Republican colleagues a moment ago, and I do think this is an interesting moment. We are hearing more forceful pushback, and it's usually from someone who's retiring or one of the more likely voices or usual suspects like Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins. And yes, we're hearing it from those folks. But you just mentioned they can only get 45 votes for this DHS or this full spending package. That means that there were Republicans that are not signing on. Do you think that we are at a tipping point?
Some of those Republicans, well, I would hope so, although I thought we were here many times. I would, before I get too excited about some of the Republicans who voted against it, these were the kind of far-right Republicans who talk about things but then never want to vote for any government spending. So I'm not sure we can read too much into that. Okay. But let's see. One of the reasons why I think this is changing, in a weird way, I mean, this is just pure speculation, the fact that the storm has kept, 2/3 of Americans kind of in their houses for the last couple of days, even folks who supported Trump, chances are they saw the video. So when the Kristi Noem or other of these kind of the goon squad folks that have been talked about come out and say that Mr. Preti, Alex Preti, was somehow a terrorist or whatever, they can see that's not the case. Their eyes are not lying. An ICU Veterans Affairs nurse who took care of wounded veterans. I think that helped drive home the point. And I'll just give you a quick little Virginia-based effort. Hanover County is a suburb outside of Richmond. It's a very, very conservative county. Last night, because of an overwhelming turnout of voters in Hanover County, the local county board voted 6-1 to not have ICE build a facility in their jurisdiction. That is a sea change from 6 months ago, and I think it shows that even folks who supported President Trump are now saying, particularly on this issue, they don't want an agency running amok, and there needs to be guardrails. And the idea is that Americans are getting shot in the streets. what happened in Minneapolis can happen in Richmond or Norfolk. It can happen in Albany. It can happen in Indianapolis. You name the city where Trump and this rogue agency at this point could be detailed next.
Yeah, it has. That video of Alex Preddy does have some of the hallmarks of what has traditionally been, you know, a real changer, a real driver in a change of public opinion, which is that everybody saw it. I think you're right to point out that everyone was inside, or a lot of us were inside because of the snow, that it was easy to understand. It was easy to see what he was doing, and then very easy to understand that the administration was lying about what he was doing, Alex Preddy. And you know, that in itself goes a long way to piercing what had seemed to be an impenetrable bubble regarding, you know, what the administration would try to tell us and what people would believe.
Yeah.
Senator Warner,
and I do think it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Katie. No, I was going to say. Remember, it does come on top. It does come on top of, like, you know, the craziness with NATO and Greenland, and you know, the question of keeping 20% of the fleet off the coast of Venezuela to blockade Venezuelan oil tankers. A lot of folks are saying, this is not what I thought we hired this guy for.
You're right about that. Senator Warner, thank you very much. I know you were up against a time limit, so I want to let you go, sir. Thank you very much.